A baby was abandoned on train tracks, and a bear appeared unexpectedly. What it did with the baby will surprise you. The fog crawled lazily between the century-old pines of the Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia. It was a particularly cold October morning when Emma Thompson, a retired Mexican railway engineer, observed the landscape she had chosen as her refuge after leaving her successful career in Mexico City from her cabin window. Her hazel eyes, marked by the wrinkles of time, scanned the horizon while holding a steaming cup of coffee. The mountain silence, which had attracted her when she decided to settle here 5 years ago, was interrupted by the familiar sound of a truck approaching. It was Jack Williams, the local forest ranger, a 35-year-old man with Hispanic roots and an unwavering dedication to wildlife preservation. "Emma," Jack called from his vehicle. "Do you have a moment?" Emma stepped out onto the porch, wrapped in her thick wool sweater. "Good morning, Jack. What brings you here so early?" "I need your expertise," he responded, approaching with a stack of papers in his hand. "They've decided to reactivate the old train line that passes through the eastern sector of the reserve. Would you like me to continue translating the story? I'll need your confirmation to proceed, as the full translation will be quite long." The news fell like a bucket of cold water on Emma. That railway line had been abandoned for a reason. Its rusty tracks snaked dangerously along the mountain's steepest slopes, and the maintenance needed to make it safe would be monumental. "Are you sure?" she asked, frowning while reviewing the documents Jack handed her. "This line hasn't been used in over a decade. The structures must be completely deteriorated." "I know," Jack nodded, running a hand through his dark hair with concern. "But apparently there was a landslide on the main line, and they need an alternative route urgently. They've scheduled the first convoy for 2 weeks from now." Emma felt her heart accelerate. During her years as an engineer in Mexico, she had seen the consequences of hasty decisions in the railway system. Images of those memories threatened to emerge, but she quickly suppressed them. "They can't do this," she muttered, more to herself than to Jack. "It's madness." While they discussed the technical details, a movement among the trees caught Jack's attention. It was Marcus, the black bear that had been part of a rehabilitation program years ago. Unlike other bears in the region, Marcus showed a unique, almost calculated behavior in his interaction with the human environment. "There he is again," Jack commented, observing the animal with a mixture of respect and curiosity. "He keeps getting closer to inhabited areas." Emma followed his gaze. The bear moved with surprising grace for his size, occasionally stopping to sniff the air. There was something in his behavior that seemed unusual, as if he were more attentive than normal. "There's something different about him today," she observed. "He seems restless." At that moment, a distant sound broke the morning's quietude. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but both Emma and Jack noticed it. Marcus also seemed to react, turning his head toward the direction of the sound. "Did you hear that?" Emma asked, leaving the documents on the porch table. Jack nodded, already in alert mode. "It sounded like a cry," Emma completed, feeling a shiver run down her spine. The forest ranger was already in motion, checking his equipment. "I'm going to investigate. It could be some hiker in trouble." "I'm coming with you," declared Emma, quickly entering her cabin to take her jacket and mountain boots. Years of fieldwork had taught her to always be prepared. As they equipped themselves, Marcus had disappeared among the trees, moving in the direction of the mysterious sound. The sky, previously clear, began to cloud over, presaging a storm. Emma couldn't help but feel that something extraordinary was about to happen, something that would forever change life in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The fog grew denser as they ventured deeper into the forest, following both the sound and the tracks left by Marcus. The cold intensified, and that cry, though intermittent, seemed to become clearer with each step they took. Emma and Jack exchanged worried glances, aware that what they would find could be the beginning of something much larger than themselves. The vegetation became thicker as Emma and Jack advanced along the path leading to the abandoned tracks. The sound guiding them had transformed into a more defined cry, unmistakably human, that chilled the blood. The fog, like a ghostly mantle, made visibility difficult and turned the silhouettes of trees into threatening shapes. "Emma, look at this," Jack whispered, pointing to some marks in the damp ground. These were not only Marcus's tracks, there were other footprints intersecting in the mud. "Coyotes," he muttered with concern. Emma's heart skipped a beat. During her years in Mexico, she had learned to respect the danger represented by hungry predators. "We must hurry," she responded, quickening her pace. At that moment, Jack's radio crackled to life with static. "Williams, we have a situation," a broken voice sounded. "The train diversion, change of plans, dangerous materials convoy, moved up for today." "Today?" Jack stopped abruptly, looking at Emma with alarm. "Carmen, do you copy? What time?" The response came through interference. "In 3 hours, she breaks in problems. We need—" The communication cut off, leaving a heavy silence between them. Emma felt the air become denser, harder to breathe. Her years of railway engineering experience screamed that this was a recipe for disaster. "Jack," Elena declared firmly, "that line is not prepared to support a convoy of hazardous materials. The railroad ties are rotten, the rails are rusted. If they try to pass through there—" A noise among the bushes interrupted her words. Marcus had reappeared, but his behavior was different. The enormous black bear moved with unusual determination, as if he wanted them to follow. "I've never seen him act like this," Jack commented, observing the animal with professional intensity. As they followed Marcus, the path led them to a clearing where the old railway line emerged between the vegetation. Rust had dyed the rails a reddish color, and the wooden supports creaked dangerously under their feet. The cry became louder, and then they saw it. Marcus had stopped beside a small bundle wrapped in blankets, placed dangerously close to the tracks. Emma brought her hands to her mouth, stifling a cry. "My God!" Jack exclaimed, cautiously advancing. It's a baby." Before they could get closer, a low growl resonated in the clearing. It didn't come from Marcus, but from the shadows between the trees. The coyotes had returned, and this time they were visible. 5 pairs of hungry eyes gleamed in the darkness. Marcus rose on his hind legs, positioning himself strategically between the coyotes and the baby. His behavior defied everything Jack knew about black bears. He was acting like a protector. "Emma," Jack whispered, "I need you to approach the baby very slowly while I keep the coyotes under control. Marcus seems to be on our side." But Emma was paralyzed, her mind working at full speed. "Jack, the train, if that convoy passes through here with hazardous materials—" Her words were interrupted by a distant but unmistakable sound, a train whistle, much closer than they should be comfortable. "We need help," Jack exclaimed, trying to make his radio work again. "And we need it now." Emma pulled out her cell phone with trembling hands. There was a person from her past in Mexico who owed her a favor. She dialed the number while watching Marcus keep the coyotes at bay with his imposing presence. "Isabella, it's Emma. I need your help." "Yes, it's an emergency. Do you remember that manual signaling system we developed for emergencies? I need you to explain exactly how to modify it for an abandoned track." The baby continued crying. The coyotes were lurking. Marcus maintained his guard, and somewhere in the mountains, a train loaded with hazardous materials was approaching tracks that were not prepared to support it. The race against time had begun, and the decisions they would make in the next few minutes would determine not only the fate of that small life, but that of the entire region. Isabella Rodriguez held the phone tightly while listening to Emma's desperate voice. From her apartment in Mexico City, the brilliant railway systems engineer felt that time was rewinding 15 years, to that night when Emma had saved her from making the worst mistake of her life. "Emma, are you sure about what you're asking me?" Isabella asked, frantically searching her computer for old signaling system files. "Modifying a manual system on an abandoned track is extremely dangerous. It's our only option," Emma responded, her voice broken by the mountain wind. "Isabella, a life is at stake. Not just the babies, but what could happen if that train derails with hazardous materials." In the forest clearing, the situation had become even more tense. Jack maintained his position, watching both the coyotes and Marcus, who continued standing guard next to the baby. The bear showed behavior that defied all logic. Every time a coyote tried to approach, Marcus would emit a soft but firm growl, without showing aggression but clearly establishing his protective stance. "Emma," Jack called softly, "time is running out. We need a plan now." The retired engineer nodded while listening to Isabella's instructions. Her eyes scanned the rusted tracks, her mind working at full speed. "Jack, in my cabin there's an old toolbox in the shed. I need someone to go get it." As if the universe had heard her plea, the sound of an approaching truck broke the tense silence. It was Carmen Suarez, the Forest Service radio operator, who had followed the coordinates of Jack's last transmission. "Holy heaven!" Carmen exclaimed as she got out of the vehicle and observed the scene. Her black hair gathered in a braid swayed in the wind while processing what she saw. A bear protecting a baby, coyotes lurking, and two people in the middle of what seemed like an impossible situation. "Carmen," Emma called, "I need you to go to my cabin. In the shed, you'll find a blue toolbox with the National Railways of Mexico logo. Bring it as quickly as possible." While Carmen drove at full speed, Isabella continued guiding Emma by phone. "The system we developed worked with a pulley and counterweight mechanism," she explained. "But Emma, there's something you should know. The reason why we never implemented it." "I know," Emma interrupted, her eyes moistening with contained tears. "It was the night of the accident in Monterey, the night that changed everything." Jack, who had been keeping his attention divided between the coyotes and the conversation, noticed the change in Emma's voice. There was pain there, an old pain she had never mentioned in the 5 years she had been in the mountains. The baby had stopped crying, as if sensing that its fate was in the hands of these people. Marcus remained motionless, his imposing presence continuing to be the only barrier between the creature and the predators. "Emma," Isabella's voice sounded firmer now, "that night was not your fault, and this is your chance to use what we learned to save lives." Isabella's words acted as a catalyst. Emma stood up, her eyes recovering the determined sparkle that had characterized her during her years as chief engineer. "You're right. Jack, I need you to help me prepare the ground. We're going to build an emergency signaling system, but we'll need more help." As if responding to her call, the sound of more vehicles began to be heard in the distance. Carmen had not only gone for the tools, she had alerted the community. The first to arrive were the Thompson brothers, owners of the local mechanical workshop, followed by Sarah Williams, the school teacher, who was also an expert in mountaineering. "The train will be here in less than 2 hours, Carmen reported upon returning with the toolbox. "And there's something else. I just received a report about problems with the convoy's brakes." Emma exchanged a look with Jack. The situation was becoming increasingly critical, and every second counted. With the phone on speakerphone, Isabella began to give detailed instructions, while the community organized itself for what would be a race against time. "There's something else," Isabella added, her voice transmitting additional concern. "Emma, do you remember why the original system failed in tests? Train vibrations can affect the mechanism. You'll need something to stabilize it." Emma looked around, her mind working at full speed. The trees, the rocks, each element of the environment could be crucial to her plan. The community was there ready to help, and Marcus maintained his unwavering guard. It was time to act. The activity in the forest clearing had transformed into an organized anthill. The Thompson brothers, Michael and Robert, were unloading tools from their truck, while Sarah Williams organized the volunteers who continued to arrive. The sky threatened rain, adding urgency to an already critical situation. "We need to create 3 signaling points," Emma explained, drawing an improvised plan in the damp earth. "The first will alert the engineer about the danger. The second will initiate the braking process, and the third will be our last opportunity." Isabella, still on the phone, complimented Emma's instructions. "The system needs perfectly calibrated counterweights. Emma, do you remember the formula we developed?" "Every second counts," Jack intervened, alternating his attention between the group and the coyotes that, although kept at bay by Marcus, had not left. "What do you need us to do first?" Emma closed her eyes for a moment, remembering that night in Monterey. The images she had kept buried for years emerged with painful clarity. The emergency lights, the screeching of brakes, the screams. She shook her head, focusing on the present. "Michael, Robert," she called with a firm voice, "I need you to use those steel beams from your workshop to create anchor points. Sarah, your mountaineering experience will be crucial for securing the cables in the tallest trees." Carmen approached with her radio. "Emma, I just received confirmation. The train is carrying industrial chemical products. If it derails in this area..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone understood the implications: the nature reserve, the nearby town. Everything would be in danger. While the team worked, Maria Thompson, Michael's wife, arrived with blankets and medical supplies. She approached the baby cautiously, always under Marcus's watchful eye. "He's so small," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. As a nurse from the town, her maternal and professional instinct activated immediately. "He needs urgent medical attention." Emma was observing the interaction between Maria and the baby when Isabella brought her out of her thoughts. "Emma, there's something I never told you about that night in Monterey." "Isabella, now is not the time," Emma interrupted, but her friend continued. "It's important that you know. The system didn't fail due to a design error. Someone sabotaged it. And I think I know who it was." This revelation hit Emma like lightning. Her hands, busy adjusting a pulley mechanism, trembled slightly. "What are you saying?" "Robert Anderson." The name came out like a venomous whisper from the phone. "I found evidence months later, but by then you had already left. He wanted total control of the project, and when you proposed a safer alternative system..." Emma felt the world stop for a moment. Robert Anderson, her former supervisor, the man who had publicly blamed her for the project's failure, the same man who now, she had heard, occupied a high position in railway administration. "Isabella," Emma's voice trembled, "the convoy that's coming, who authorized its diversion on this route?" The silence on the other end of the line was answer enough. "Emma!" Sarah's scream brought her back to reality. "The cables are secured at the first point." The work continued at a frantic pace. The Thompson brothers had managed to create an ingenious system of pulleys using car parts and construction materials. Sarah and her team of volunteers climbed trees and secured cables with the precision of surgeons. Marcus, meanwhile, had begun to show even more surprising behavior. Every time the baby made the slightest whimper, the bear would approach close enough for the little one to feel his warm presence, instantly calming him. "I've never seen anything like it," Jack commented, amazed. "It's like he understands exactly what the baby needs." Maria, who had managed to get close enough to examine the baby, made a disturbing discovery. "Emma, look at this," she called softly, pointing to a small bracelet on the baby's wrist. As she approached, Emma felt her heart stop. The bracelet bore a symbol she knew all too well, the old logo of the National Railways of Mexico. "Isabella," she whispered into the phone, "I think this is bigger than we thought." The distant sound of the train was getting closer, mixing with the thunder of the approaching storm. The time was running out, and the revelations only increased the pressure on their shoulders. The community worked united, but would it be enough to prevent a tragedy? The storm was approaching rapidly, with dark clouds swirling over the Blue Ridge Mountains. Emma held the small bracelet between her trembling fingers, her mind connecting pieces of a puzzle she didn't know existed. "Isabella," she whispered into the phone, moving away from the group. "This logo is from the 1985 Special Series. Only high-ranking personnel had access to these badges. Are you sure?" Isabella's voice sounded tense. "Emma, Robert Anderson was in Virginia last week, supposedly for a railway safety conference." A lightning bolt illuminated the sky, followed by the rumble of thunder that made the baby start crying again. Marcus, who had not moved from his protective position, emitted a soft growl that, surprisingly, seemed to calm the little one. Maria approached with an additional blanket. "Emma, there's something else you should see," she said, pointing to a small mark on the original baby blanket. "These are embroidered initials, R.A." Emma's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? No, she had to focus on the immediate problem. The train was approaching, and everyone's lives depended on the signaling system working. "The first point is ready," Sarah shouted from high up in a tree where she had been securing the pulley mechanism. The Thompson brothers had managed to improvise a counterweight system using car parts and carefully selected rocks. "We need to test the system," Emma indicated, returning to her engineer mode. "Michael, Robert, position yourselves at points 2 and 3. Sarah, maintain your position at point 1. At my signal, we'll activate the sequence." Jack approached Emma, his face showing concern. "The coyotes are still there," he murmured, "and it's starting to rain. If the ground becomes too slippery..." As if confirming their fears, a closer thunder resonated in the valley, and the first raindrops began to fall. The coyotes, restless from the storm, began to move closer to the perimeter Marcus was maintaining. "Emma!" Isabella's voice sounded urgent through the phone. I just received a message from an old colleague. The train, there's something they're not telling you. The chemical materials it's transporting, they're experimental. If they come into contact with water..." The rain began to intensify, and Emma felt the weight of the world falling on her shoulders. Every decision she would make in the next few minutes could mean the difference between salvation and disaster. "Test of the system!" Emma shouted over the noise of the storm. "Now!" The Thompson brothers activated their respective mechanisms. The pulley system began to move, the improvised signals rising one after another, and then a cable became too tense. "It's breaking!" Sarah shouted from her position. "The counterweight isn't balanced." Emma ran towards the point of failure, her mind working at full speed. They needed something to stabilize the system, something with the exact weight. "The tools!" she exclaimed. "Carmen, bring my toolbox, quickly!" While Carmen ran to her vehicle, Maria noticed something disturbing. "Emma, the baby, he's burning with fever." The situation was becoming more complicated by the moment. The rain was falling increasingly harder. The coyotes were getting closer, attracted by the movement and the smell of the sick baby, and the sound of the train was becoming more present. Marcus, however, seemed to have his own plan. To everyone's surprise, the bear began pushing some fallen rocks with his snout, strategically placing them near the failing pulley system. "This can't be," Jack muttered, observing the animal's behavior. "It's like he understands what we need." Isabella, still on the line, broke the silence with another revelation. "Emma, I just confirmed something. Robert Anderson not only was in Virginia, he was specifically in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And he wasn't alone." The rain continued falling, mixing with the tears Emma could not contain anymore. The past and present were intertwining in a way she never would have imagined, while the future hung from a cable about to break and a train approaching inexorably. "We have to make it work," Emma whispered, more to herself than to the others. "For the baby, for the truth, and for everything we lost that night in Monterey." The rain was hitting hard, while Carmen returned running with Emma's toolbox. The oxidized metal of the box revealed Spanish inscriptions, reminders of a previous life in the Mexican railways. "Emma!" Sarah shouted from her elevated position. "The cable won't hold much longer." With precise movements, Emma began distributing the heavy old tools as additional counterweights. Each piece had a purpose. Every gram counted. Her expert hands worked, while her mind processed the information about Robert Anderson. "Isabella," she spoke into the phone she was keeping protected from the rain, "I need you to tell me exactly what you discovered about Robert's visit to the mountains." "According to my contact," Isabella responded, "Robert was meeting with executives from a chemical company. Emma, they're developing a new experimental fuel. The train that's approaching is transporting the first prototypes." Michael Thompson, soaked by the rain, approached urgently. "The improvised brake system is ready at point 2, but with this rain, the calculated friction will change completely." Maria, who was protecting the baby from the rain under an improvised shelter, noticed that the fever was still increasing. "We need to take him to a hospital soon," she warned, her voice tinged with professional concern. Marcus, surprisingly, had begun to tear bark from nearby trees, creating a kind of natural barrier that protected the baby and Maria from the most intense rain. His behavior continued to defy everything Jack knew about wild bears. "Marcus's protective instinct," Jack muttered, observing the animal. "It's like he knows something we don't." At that moment, a new lightning bolt illuminated the sky, revealing a figure in the distance. It was a woman approaching laboriously along the muddy path, carrying what seemed to be a briefcase. "It can't be!" exclaimed Isabella through the phone. "Emma, is someone else arriving?" "Yes," Emma responded, squinting to see better through the curtain of rain. "A woman? It must be Laura Anderson." Isabella's voice sounded alarmed. "Robert's daughter. She worked in the chemical laboratory. She quit a week ago, taking confidential documents." The woman was approaching closer, struggling against the wind and rain. Her face showed a mixture of determination and fear. "Help me, please," she shouted. "I have proof." "My father, the chemicals that train is transporting, they're not what they claim to be." Before anyone could respond, an ear-splitting sound cut through the air. The train's whistle, much closer than they expected. The convoy was approaching at high speed, and the vibrations could already be felt on the rusted tracks. "Emma," Raphael shouted from his position. "The system needs to be activated now or it'll be too late." The engineer looked around. The baby burning with fever, Marcus keeping the coyotes at bay, Laura Anderson with her briefcase of secrets, the signaling system on the verge of collapse, and the rain threatening to ruin everything. "Isabella," Emma said firmly, "I'm going to do what we should have done 15 years ago. I'm going to stop this." With a speed born of years of experience, Emma began to readjust the counterweights. Her hands moved with surgical precision, ignoring the rain blurring her vision. "Sarah, Michael, Raphael," she shouted over the noise of the storm. "Get ready for the activation sequence. Jack, help Laura get here. Maria, keep the baby as protected as possible." Time was running out. The train was approaching at full speed through the rusted tracks, loaded with dangerous chemicals and corporate secrets. The rain fell mercilessly, threatening to destroy their efforts, while the life of an innocent baby hung by a thread. And in the middle of it all, Marcus remained firm, like an ancestral guardian who understood more than his animal nature suggested. His dark eyes seemed to contain a wisdom that transcended human understanding, while the storm raged, and the fate of everyone depended on the decisions they would make in the next few minutes. The briefcase Laura Anderson was carrying fell to the muddy ground when Jack helped her arrive at the group. Her eyes, identical to her father's, were fixed on the baby Maria was protecting from the rain. "It's him," Laura whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise of the storm. "He's my sister Patricia's son." Emma, who was adjusting the last counterweights of the system, stopped abruptly. "Patricia? The lead scientist of the experimental fuel project? My sister discovered something terrible," Laura continued, opening the briefcase with trembling hands. "The new fuel, the side effects. She tried to stop the project, but then..." A new thunder drowned out her words, and the baby began to cry more forcefully. Marcus, who had not moved from his protective position, emitted a soft growl that seemed to resonate with the thunder itself. "Emma," Isabella's voice sounded desperate through the phone, "the train is less than 5 minutes away. The sensors we installed on the main line show it's coming at a much higher speed than allowed." The Thompson brothers were finishing securing the last points of the system, while Sarah, from her elevated position, kept tense the network of cables connecting the 3 signaling points. "Laura," Emma approached the woman while continuing to coordinate the work, "I need you to tell me exactly what Patricia discovered. The fuel..." Laura pulled out some documents from the briefcase, protecting them from the rain as best she could. "Is not just experimental, it's unstable. When exposed to certain natural catalysts like rainwater, it can trigger a devastating chain reaction. Patricia discovered this during the last tests. Maria, who was listening while attending to the baby, intervened. The fever is related to this, right? The little one was exposed." Laura nodded, her tears mixing with the rain on her face. "Patricia tried to expose the truth, but our father, she had to hide the baby. She knew I would be here today, following the train. She left the little one where she knew we would find him." "Emma," Raphael's cry cut through the air. "The vibrations are increasing. The train is very close." The engineer looked around, evaluating the situation in seconds. The rain had worsened, turning the terrain into a treacherous, muddy mess. The coyotes, though kept at bay by Marcus, continued to lurk, now more restless by the train's vibrations. "Isabella," Emma called to the phone, "I need you to guide me in the exact sequence. Like that night in Monterey, but this time we'll do it right." "Emma," Isabella's voice trembled, "if Laura's documents are correct and the fuel reacts with water, that's why we have to stop that train now," Emma interrupted. "Everyone to your positions. Sarah, when I give the signal, activate the first point. Michael, you'll be ready for the second. Raphael, you'll be our last line of defense." Laura approached the baby, and for the first time Marcus allowed someone besides Maria to get so close. "You look so much like your mother," she whispered to the little one. The sound of the train was deafening now. The vibrations made the ground tremble, and the trees creaked under the combined force of wind and storm. "Emma," Jack shouted, "the rails, they're starting to deform with heat and rain." It was the moment of truth. Emma raised her hand, ready to give the signal that would initiate the sequence. All her past, her years of experience, the pain from that night in Monterey, everything converged in this moment. "Isabella," she said firmly, "this time we won't fail. For Patricia, for her baby, for all of us." The train appeared around the curve, its lights cutting through the rain curtain like bright knives. The moment had arrived. Emma lowered her hand, initiating a sequence of events that would forever change the lives of everyone present. The world seemed to stop when Emma lowered her hand. Sarah, soaked by the rain but firm in her position, activated the first mechanism. The pulleys screeched, the ropes tensed, and the first signal rose like a beacon in the storm. "First signal activated," Sarah shouted over the roar of the approaching train. Isabella from Mexico guided the sequence. "Wait exactly 3 seconds before the second point. Timing is crucial," Emma counted mentally, her eyes fixed on the train emerging from the curve like a metal monster. The rain beat against the rusted rails, creating an unsettling vapor where the hot wheels touched the wet metal. "Now, Michael," Emma ordered. The second mechanism activated, but something went wrong. One of the ropes, tensed by the weight and weakened by the rain, began to fray. "It's breaking," Michael shouted, struggling to keep the system in place. At that moment, Marcus did something extraordinary. Abandoning his position next to the baby, the bear moved with surprising speed toward the failing mechanism. With a precision that defied his nature, he used his weight to stabilize the wobbling structure. "Incredible," Jack exclaimed, who had never seen such behavior in his years as a forest ranger. Laura, holding the documents protected from the rain, shouted, "Emma, according to Patricia's reports, the fuel must already be reacting with the rain. The tanks could be compromised." The train continued its implacable advance, though the first signals seemed to have alerted the engineer. The wheels screeched against the rails in an attempt to reduce speed, but the rain made the brakes almost useless. "Raphael," Emma shouted, "last signal, now!" The younger Thompson activated the final mechanism, a complex network of pulleys and counterweights that Emma had designed based on her years of experience. It was her last chance to stop the train before it reached the critical point. Maria, meanwhile, noticed something about the baby. "His temperature is dropping," she exclaimed with relief. "Whatever was affecting him seems to be diminishing." Isabella intervened through the phone. "Emma, according to Patricia's original calculations that Laura just sent me, the fuel stabilizes when exposed to certain natural elements, the tree bark that Marcus was collecting. It must contain some kind of natural neutralizer." The train began to reduce its speed more significantly now, its wheels protesting against the rails. The improvised signals had worked, activating the convoy's emergency protocols, but it was still coming too fast. "It's not enough," Sarah shouted from her position. "We need more resistance." Emma looked around desperately. The coyotes had retreated, scared by the noise and vibrations. The rain continued falling heavily, and the vapor rising from the rails created a ghostly curtain. It was then that Marcus, still maintaining the second mechanism's stability with his weight, began to emit a series of rhythmic growls. To everyone's amazement, more bears emerged from among the trees. "They're from the same rehabilitation program," Jack whispered, recognizing the ear tags. "Marcus is calling them—" The bears, as if understanding the gravity of the situation, began to push fallen rocks and logs towards the sides of the track, creating natural barriers that would channel the train if it derailed. "Emma!" Isabella's voice sounded hopeful. "The train is reaching critical braking speed. The system is working." The engineer maintained her position, mentally calculating every variable, every possibility. The rain had slightly decreased, as if nature itself were holding its breath before the imminent outcome. "Laura!" Emma called without taking her eyes off the train. "When this is over, we need to find Patricia. Your sister was right all along, and she deserves to be heard." The convoy continued its struggle against physics and destiny, while the improvised signaling system, the bears' intervention, and the collective effort of the entire community converged in a decisive moment that would determine the future of all present. The screeching of the train's brakes against the wet rails created a terrifying symphony that resonated throughout the valley. Sparks flew when metal scraped against metal, creating flashes that competed with the lightning of the storm that was beginning to subside. "It's working!" Sarah shouted from her elevated position. "The speed is decreasing." Emma kept her eyes fixed on the train, her years of experience allowing her to calculate the approximate speed by sound and vibrations. "It's still coming too fast," she muttered. "Isabella, we need more resistance in the last stretch." "Emma," Isabella's voice sounded clear through the phone. "The documents Laura just sent. Patricia had developed an emergency protocol. The tank valves can be closed remotely." Laura, who had been protecting the baby with Maria, stood up suddenly. "The code, Patricia gave it to me before she disappeared. Her hands trembled as she frantically searched her soaked briefcase. The bears, following Marcus's example, continued their coordinated work. They had created a series of natural barriers that now extended along the track, as if they understood exactly what was at stake. "I've never seen anything like it," Jack commented, amazed by the animals' behavior. It's like Marcus had shared his training with the entire pack. The baby, who had been calmer, began to agitate again. Maria noticed something peculiar. His temperature is fluctuating with the train's proximity. Whatever is in those tanks, the baby is sensitive to it. Emma quickly connected the dots. "Laura, is it possible that Patricia accidentally exposed the baby during her research?" "Yes," Laura responded, finally finding a small device in her briefcase. That's why she was so desperate to expose the truth, not just because of the fuel's danger, but because of the effects she had already witnessed. The train was now less than 100 meters away, its imposing mass making the ground tremble. The Thompson brothers maintained their positions at the control points, while Sarah secured the cables from above. "Laura," Isabella shouted through the phone. "We need that code now." With trembling fingers, Laura began to enter a sequence on the device. "Patricia designed the system thinking about the future," she explained while typing. "She knew we would eventually need a way to stop everything." Marcus, who had kept the second mechanism stable all this time, emitted a deep growl that seemed to synchronize with the train's brake screeching. The other bears responded to the sound, pressing more forcefully against the natural barriers they had built. "The code is entered," Laura announced, "but we need to be closer for the signal to reach the tanks." Emma made an instant decision. "Jack, cover me. I'm going to approach with Laura." "Emma, no!" Isabella's voice sounded alarmed. "It's too dangerous." But Emma was already in motion, guiding Laura towards the approaching train. Her years in the railways had taught her exactly where they needed to be for the signal to be effective. The train's engineer was now visible, his face a mask of concentration and fear, as he struggled with the controls. The improvised signals had worked. He was trying to stop the convoy with all his might. "Now, Laura," Emma shouted when they reached the optimal point. Laura pressed the final button on her device, and for a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, a hydraulic sound emerged from the train's tanks, barely audible over the brake screeching. "The valves!" Isabella exclaimed through the phone. "They're closing." The effect was immediate. Without the additional pressure in the tanks, the braking systems began to function more effectively. The train, which had been fighting against physics and destiny, finally began to yield. Maria, holding the baby, noticed another change. "His temperature is returning to normal. Whatever was in those tanks is no longer affecting him." The bears, as if feeling their work was almost complete, began to slowly retreat towards the forest, leaving only Marcus in his position next to the signaling system. The train was approaching its final point, its wheels protesting against the rails as the speed decreased more and more. Emma and Laura remained firm in their position, their hearts beating in unison with the train's rhythm, which was finally, miraculously, beginning to stop. The train finally stopped, its wheels still smoking from the friction, just a few meters from where Emma and Laura were standing. The rain had diminished to a soft drizzle, as if nature itself had sighed with relief. "We did it!" Isabella's voice resonated with jubilation through the phone. "Emma, you did it! This time we did it right!" The engineer, a middle-aged man named John Rodriguez, emerged from the cabin with shaky legs. "I've never seen a signaling system like this," he commented, looking amazed at the network of pulleys and cables. "You saved my life. You saved everyone's lives." Laura quickly approached the wagons carrying the tanks. "We need to verify if the valves closed completely," she said, while consulting Patricia's documents. "The emergency protocol should have also initiated the stabilization process." Emma followed her, years of experience guiding her steps. "The pressure sensors," she pointed out, "are showing normal readings. Whatever Patricia designed, it worked perfectly." Jack coordinated with the Thompson brothers and Sarah to carefully dismantle the improvised signaling system. "The cables held up better than we expected," he observed, almost as if something else was helping us. His words were interrupted by a soft but clear sound. The baby was laughing. For the first time since they found him, the little one was showing signs of true joy. Maria, who was still holding him, noticed something else. "His temperature is completely normal now," she reported with professional relief. "And look at this." She pointed to where Marcus remained, observing the scene with surprising calm. The bear, who had demonstrated extraordinary behavior throughout the entire crisis, began to slowly retreat towards the forest. But before disappearing among the trees, he stopped and looked directly at the baby, as if wanting to make sure one last time that everything was all right. "There's something else," Laura said, reviewing her briefcase. "Something Patricia left for this moment." She pulled out a sealed envelope, protected in a waterproof bag. "Emma, it's for you." With trembling hands, Emma opened the envelope and began to read. "Dear Emma, if you're reading this, it means my sister Laura managed to arrive in time. I know about what happened in Monterey. I know that my father, Robert, sabotaged your system. I discovered this while investigating the side effects of the new fuel." Isabella, who was still on the line, held her breath. "Emma, after all these years," the letter continued, "the experimental fuel was just the tip of the iceberg. I discovered they were using the old railway network to test compounds without regulatory oversight. My son was accidentally exposed during a test. When I tried to report it, they threatened to destroy all evidence, including the medical records that could help treat my baby." Maria, listening while rocking the little one, connected the dots. That's why the baby was reacting to the train's proximity. His immune system recognized the compounds. "But there's more," Emma continued reading. "Marcus, the bear who helped protect my son, was part of an earlier experiment. The animals in the rehabilitation program were exposed to early versions of the compound. Instead of negative effects, they developed a unique sensitivity to chemicals and an extraordinary cooperative behavior. They are more connected with their surroundings and each other than anyone could imagine." Jack nodded, finally understanding the unusual behavior of the bears. That's why Marcus knew exactly what to do and how to coordinate with the other bears. They could sense the danger in the air. John Rodriguez, who had been listening, stepped forward. "Ma'am, Emma, there's something you should know. The orders for this transport came directly from Robert Anderson. He insisted we use this route, despite warnings about its condition." Laura clenched her fists. "My father, did he know Patricia would leave her son here? Was he trying to—" "No," Emma interrupted, continuing to read the letter. "Patricia anticipated everything. She knew I would be here, that my experience and history with Robert would help us stop this. She knew Laura would find the evidence, and that together we could expose the truth." The baby let out another laugh, as if understanding that the danger had passed. The last rays of sun began to pierce the clouds, creating a rainbow over the Blue Ridge Mountains. "Isabella," Emma called on the phone, "I need you to send all this information to the authorities. This time, Robert Anderson won't be able to hide the truth." The community began to gather around the stopped train while the sun broke through the clouds. Carmen had alerted local authorities, and the first official vehicles were beginning to arrive at the scene. "Emma," Isabella called through the phone, "I just received important news. Robert Anderson is on his way. Apparently, someone informed him about the train's detention." Laura, organizing documents next to Emma, turned pale. "He's not coming alone," she said, checking her phone. "I just received a message from a contact at the company. He's bringing the entire legal team." Maria, who continued caring for the baby, noticed that the little one had fallen asleep peacefully. "It's like he feels he's finally safe," she commented, while the Thompson brothers improvised a more comfortable shelter, using tarps and materials from their trucks. Jack approached the group, returning from a quick perimeter inspection. "Marcus and the other bears have established a kind of natural perimeter around the area," he reported. "It's fascinating. They're protecting the evidence in their own way." Sarah, who had finished photographically documenting the entire improvised signaling system, joined the conversation. "We have to preserve everything exactly as it is," she pointed out. "Every cable, every pulley tells part of the story." John Rodriguez, the engineer, had remained close to the group and now decided to speak. "There's something else you should know. In the cabin, I have a record of all communications. Robert Anderson gave specific orders to maintain speed despite road conditions." Emma nodded while continuing to read Patricia's letter. "Here's more. Patricia documented every experiment, every test. The effects of the compound on the bears were not accidental. They were studying how to improve the animal's ability to detect environmental hazards. That's why Marcus knew exactly what to do with the baby," Jack reflected. "He wasn't just protecting a defenseless being. He could sense that the little one had been exposed to the same compound. Isabella intervened through the phone. "Emma, I've just sent all the documents to my contact at the Environmental Protection Agency. I also have trusted journalists waiting to cover the story. This time Robert won't be able to hide it." Laura approached the sleeping baby, her eyes full of tears. "Patricia was right to trust all of you. She knew that this community, these people, these animals, everyone would unite to protect what is right." The sound of helicopters began to be heard in the distance. Emma recognized Robert's company logo on one of them. "It's time," she said, standing up. "Isabella, keep the line open. We're going to need witnesses to everything that happens here." Maria, protecting the baby, noticed that Marcus had returned to the clearing, this time accompanied by 2 more bears. They positioned themselves strategically, like silent guardians of the truth about to be revealed. "There's something else in the letter," Emma continued, reading the final pages. "Patricia left specific instructions on how to treat the compound's effects in her son, and also evidence that Robert knew about the risks from the beginning, even before the Monterey incident." The helicopters were approaching, and the tension in the atmosphere was palpable. Sarah and the Thompson brothers positioned themselves next to the key points of the signaling system, ready to protect the evidence. Carmen coordinated with local authorities who were beginning to establish an official perimeter. "Emma," Jack called, pointing towards the forest. "Look." More bears emerged among the trees, dozens of them, all with the characteristic tags of the rehabilitation program. They moved with perfect synchronization, establishing a protective circle around the clearing. "It's like all of nature is on our side," Laura whispered, holding firmly to the documents that would expose her father's crimes. The moment of truth was approaching. Robert Anderson was about to face not only the consequences of his present actions, but also the ghosts of his past. And this time, he had against him not only irrefutable evidence, but also a united community, a protective nature, and the truth that his own daughter Patricia had left as a legacy. The helicopters landed in a nearby clearing, raising a curtain of leaves and rainwater. Robert Anderson emerged from the first one, his impeccable suit contrasting with the humid and wild environment. His face, marked by years of power and secrets, tensed when he saw the scene before him. The stopped train, the united community, and the bears forming a protective perimeter. "What does this mean?" His voice resonated with practiced authority. "I demand to know who gave the order to stop this transport." Emma stepped forward, Patricia's letter in one hand and her old National Railways identification in the other. "I did, Robert. And this time you won't be able to bury the truth like you did in Monterey." Robert stopped abruptly as he recognized her. His legal team, descending from the second helicopter, hurried to surround him with briefcases and documents. "Emma Thompson," he pronounced her name as if it were a bad taste in his mouth. "You have no authority here. This is a private transport with all the permits. Permits to transport unregulated experimental compounds through abandoned tracks," Laura interrupted, emerging from among the crowd. "Or permits to experiment with animals and expose humans without their consent." Robert's face lost color as he saw his daughter. "Laura, what are you doing here?" "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly, Father," she responded firmly. "Patricia explained everything to me. And she left evidence. Evidence that not even you will be able to make disappear." Isabella, still on the speakerphone that Emma kept open, intervened. "Robert, the evidence is already in the hands of the relevant authorities and media, including the documents about the sabotage in Monterey." The lawyers began to whisper frantically among themselves, while Robert tried to maintain his composure. "This is all a misunderstanding. The compound is completely safe." A soft cry interrupted his words. The baby had awakened, and Maria was gently rocking him. Robert looked in the direction of the sound, and for the first time his mask of control completely shattered. "My grandson," he whispered, taking an involuntary step toward the baby. Marcus, who had remained near the group, emitted a soft but firm growl. The other bears responded in sequence, creating a chorus that resonated throughout the valley. "It's extraordinary, isn't it?" Jack commented, approaching. "How the animals you used in your experiments now protect the innocent from you." Sarah advanced with her camera. "We have documented the entire improvised signaling system. How we had to stop a train that you ordered to maintain speed on a track you knew was in poor condition." The Thompson brothers added, "And we have the train communication records, Mr. Anderson. Your specific orders to ignore safety protocols." Carmen approached with her radio. "Federal authorities are on their way." And they're bringing someone who wants to talk to you. Patricia, Robert muttered. Yes, Laura confirmed. My sister is safe. She's been working with the authorities, documenting every experiment, every decision, every order you gave. Emma extended Patricia's letter. She planned everything, Robert. She knew you would try to use this abandoned route again. She knew I would be here, that I would recognize the signs. She knew Laura would find the evidence and that this community would unite to protect what is right. The lawyers began to discreetly retreat, recognizing a lost battle. The sound of more sirens was approaching from the main road. Everything I built? Robert looked around, as if seeing the extent of his actions for the first time. All the power, the influence, it was never yours to take, Emma responded. The safety of people, environmental protection, the truth, that's what matters. Marcus approached the baby, and for a moment, the powerful Robert Anderson found himself face to face with one of his experimental victims. The bear looked at him with an intelligence that defied human comprehension, as if judging not only his actions, but the weight of all his secrets. The sound of sirens intensified as the first official vehicles arrived at the location. Among them, a smaller helicopter descended in the clearing, and from it emerged a figure that made everyone hold their breath. Patricia Anderson. Patricia, Robert whispered. All his previous arrogance turned to ashes as he saw his older daughter. Patricia, with dark hair identical to her sister Laura's and her mother's determined eyes, advanced with a firm step. Behind her, federal agents began to cordon off the area and document the scene. I knew you would try something like this, Father. Her voice was soft but firm. That's why I had to get ahead of your plans. Patricia's arrival transformed the entire atmosphere. She walked with a deliberate grace, her scientific background evident in every calculated step. Behind her, federal agents began setting up their initial perimeter, their radios crackling with urgent communications. Dad, Patricia spoke calmly, did you really think you could continue these experiments without consequences? Robert Anderson seemed to shrink, his powerful corporate persona dissolving under his daughter's direct gaze. The bears, still maintaining their strategic positions, watched the scene with an almost human-like intensity. The compound, Patricia continued, pulling out a thick folder from her briefcase, wasn't just an experimental fuel. It was a complex biological catalyst designed to enhance environmental sensitivity in living organisms. Jack, the forest ranger, stepped closer. That explains Marcus's behavior. The bears aren't just reacting. They're processing information at a level we've never seen before. Emma examined the documents Patricia was presenting. You were studying how certain chemical compounds could increase interspecies communication and environmental awareness, she realized. Precisely, Patricia confirmed, but my father wanted to weaponize the research, create organisms that could detect chemical threats faster than any existing technology. Laura, holding the baby, noticed something extraordinary. The infant seemed completely calm, almost synchronized with the bears surrounding them. He's connected to them, she whispered. The federal agents began interviewing John Rodriguez, the train's engineer, who was providing detailed accounts of Robert's direct orders to ignore safety protocols. Mr. Anderson gave explicit instructions to maintain speed, Rodriguez testified, despite clear indications that the track was unstable and the cargo potentially dangerous. Isabella, still connected through the phone, was coordinating with journalists and environmental protection agencies. This goes beyond a simple corporate cover-up, she told Emma. We're talking about systematic environmental and human rights violations. Marcus, the bear who had been central to their survival, approached Patricia. To everyone's astonishment, the animal seemed to recognize her, emitting a soft sound that was neither a growl nor a typical bear vocalization. The bears in the rehabilitation program, Patricia explained, were never just subjects. They became partners in understanding how complex chemical interactions could modify behavioral patterns. Robert finally spoke, his voice a mere whisper of his previous authoritative tone. You don't understand the potential of this research. No, Dad, Laura interrupted. You never understood the ethical implications. Science isn't about control, it's about understanding and protecting. The baby suddenly laughed, a clear, bright sound that seemed to resonate with the bears. Marcus turned his head, looking directly at the child with an intelligence that defied traditional animal behavior. He's a living result of the research, Patricia revealed. Exposed to early compound versions, he developed extraordinary sensory capabilities. That's why he was so sensitive to the train's approach. Emma approached the group, her engineering background helping her process the complex information. You were creating a new form of environmental communication, not just detecting threats but actively preventing them. The federal agents began preparing Robert Anderson for formal questioning. His legal team, recognizing the overwhelming evidence, had already started distancing themselves from their now toxic client. Everything is documented, Patricia said firmly. Every experiment, every decision, every attempt to suppress the truth. And now the world will know. The afternoon light began to change, casting long shadows across the clearing where the train stood motionless. The bears continued their vigilant positioning, creating a living perimeter that seemed more deliberate than any human security system. The documentation goes back 15 years, Patricia continued, spreading several files on a makeshift table created by the Thompson brothers. My research shows that the compound doesn't just modify environmental sensitivity, it creates a form of interspecies communication we've never seen before. Jack, examining the documents, noticed something extraordinary. These bears are responding to chemical signals in ways that defy everything we know about animal behavior. It's like they're reading the environment like a complex language. Isabella, still connected through the phone, was coordinating with scientific journals and environmental protection agencies. This is bigger than a corporate scandal, she told Emma. We're talking about a potential revolution in understanding biological communication. Robert Anderson, now handcuffed and surrounded by federal agents, seemed to have shrunk. The powerful corporate executive was now just a defeated man facing the consequences of his actions. The baby, Laura asked Patricia, what makes him so special? Patricia smiled, a complex expression of scientific fascination and maternal protection. He's the first human subject who didn't just survive exposure to the compound, he integrated with it. Watch how he interacts with Marcus. Indeed, the baby seemed completely at ease surrounded by bears that would typically be considered dangerous predators. Marcus, in particular, maintained a protective stance that went beyond typical animal behavior. The compound creates a form of empathetic resonance, Patricia explained. Not just chemical detection, but actual emotional and environmental understanding. The bears can sense chemical changes, emotional states, potential threats, all simultaneously. Emma, her engineering background helping her process the information, approached the group. This is more than an environmental detection system. You've essentially created a living, breathing early warning network. The federal agents continued their meticulous documentation. John Rodriguez, the train's engineer, provided additional testimony about the experimental cargo and Robert's direct interference with safety protocols. Mr. Anderson insisted on this specific route, Rodriguez testified. He said it was crucial that the transport remain undetected. Now I understand why. Laura looked at her father, a mixture of anger and disappointment in her eyes. You were willing to risk entire ecosystems for your research. Patricia discovered the ethical way forward, and you tried to stop her. Marcus approached the baby, who reached out with surprising coordination. The bear's response was equally remarkable, a gentle nudge that seemed more like communication than a typical animal interaction. The compound creates neural pathways that allow for unprecedented interspecies understanding, Patricia continued. Not just detection, but actual empathetic connection. The clearing was now full of federal agents, scientists, and journalists. The bears remained in their strategic positions, watching everything with an intelligence that seemed to challenge human understanding. What happens now? Jack asked, looking at Patricia. She smiled, a smile that held both scientific excitement and human compassion. Now we protect what we've discovered. Protect what? And we ensure it's used to help, not to control. The baby laughed again, a sound that seemed to resonate with the bears, with the forest, with the very environment around them. It was a laugh that promised future revelations, future discoveries. As the baby's laughter echoed through the clearing, something extraordinary began to happen. The bears started to move in a synchronized pattern, not threatening but almost ceremonial. Marcus remained closest to the child, his movements deliberate and protective. This is unprecedented, Patricia whispered, her scientific mind racing to document every detail. The compound doesn't just modify individual organisms, It's creating a collective intelligence. Emma approached, her engineering background helping her process the complex interactions. It's like they're communicating through chemical signatures we can't even detect, she observed. Isabella, still connected through the phone, was coordinating with research institutions worldwide. The implications are massive, she told the group. This isn't just about environmental detection. It's about a completely new form of interspecies communication. The federal agents continued their investigation, but even they seemed mesmerized by the bear's behavior. Robert Anderson, now in custody, watched the scene with a mixture of defeat and lingering scientific curiosity. The neural pathways, Patricia explained to Laura, create a form of empathetic resonance. The bears aren't just sensing chemical changes, they're understanding emotional states, potential threats, environmental shifts, all simultaneously. Jack, the forest ranger, had never seen anything like it. They're moving like a single organism, he commented. But each bear maintains individual awareness. The baby continued to laugh, a sound that seemed to trigger subtle responses in the bears. Each movement, each subtle shift appeared to be part of a complex communication system that humans were only beginning to understand. Dad tried to weaponize this, Laura said, looking at her father. But Patricia discovered something far more important, a way of understanding our environment that goes beyond human perception. Robert Anderson remained silent, the weight of his actions now fully visible. The powerful corporate executive had been reduced to a witness of a discovery he had tried to suppress. Marcus approached the baby again, this time accompanied by 2 other bears. Their movement was coordinated, almost ritualistic. The baby reached out, not with fear, but with a sense of connection that defied normal infant behavior. He's not just tolerating their presence, Maria, the nurse, observed. He's actively communicating with them. Patricia pulled out a series of complex scientific documents. The compound creates neural bridges that allow for unprecedented interspecies understanding. It's not about control, it's about connection. The clearing was now a scene of scientific marvel. Federal agents, scientists, journalists, and the bears themselves created a tableau that promised to change humanity's understanding of environmental communication. "What happens next?" Jack asked, looking at Patricia. She smiled, a smile that held both scientific excitement and human compassion. "We protect the research. We ensure it's used to help, not to control. And we learn from what these bears are showing us." The baby's laughter continued, a sound that seemed to vibrate with the forest itself. It was a promise of future discoveries, of a connection between species that humans had never imagined possible. As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the trees, the bears began to slowly retreat. But their movement was not an abandonment. It was more like a promise of continued connection, of a communication that went beyond human understanding. The golden light transformed the clearing into a canvas of extraordinary possibilities. Marcus was the last to move, turning back several times to ensure the baby's safety before disappearing into the forest's depths. "He's tracking our chemical signatures," Patricia observed. Her scientific curiosity piqued. "Not just visually, but through complex molecular interactions we're only beginning to understand." Emma approached the federal investigators. "We need to preserve every piece of evidence. This isn't just about corporate misconduct. This is a breakthrough in interspecies communication." Laura, holding the documents her sister had meticulously prepared, looked at her father. Robert Anderson, once a powerful corporate executive, now seemed diminished. A man whose ambition had been completely overshadowed by the discovery before him. "The compound," Patricia explained to the gathered scientists and agents, "creates neural pathways that allow for unprecedented environmental sensitivity. The bears aren't just detecting chemical changes, they're interpreting them with a complexity that challenges our entire understanding of animal intelligence." Isabella, still connected through the phone, was coordinating with research institutions globally. This discovery could revolutionize environmental monitoring, animal conservation, and our understanding of collective intelligence, she told the group. John Rodriguez, the train's engineer, approached Patricia. "How long have you been studying these interactions?" he asked, fascinated. "Secretly for over a decade," she responded. "My father wanted to weaponize the research. I wanted to understand it." The baby, seemingly unaware of the scientific marvel surrounding him, continued to laugh occasionally, each sound causing subtle reactions among the remaining bears at the clearing's edge. "Look at how he responds," Maria, the nurse, pointed out. "His neurological responses are synchronized with the bear's movements. It's like they're communicating on a level we can't comprehend." Jack, the forest ranger, was documenting everything. "This goes beyond traditional animal behavior," he muttered, taking photographs of the bear's strategic positioning. Robert Anderson finally spoke, his voice a mere whisper of his previous authoritative tone. "You don't understand the potential of this research." "No, Dad," Laura interrupted firmly. "You never understood the ethical implications. Science isn't about control. It's about understanding and protecting." The federal agents began preparing more comprehensive documentation. What had started as an investigation into a potentially dangerous train transport had transformed into something far more significant, a discovery that could change humanity's understanding of environmental intelligence. Patricia pulled out additional research documents. The compound creates a form of empathetic resonance, not just chemical detection, but actual emotional and environmental understanding. The bears can sense chemical changes, emotional states, potential threats, all simultaneously. As darkness began to fall, the clearing became a scene of extraordinary scientific potential. The stopped train, the bears' strategic retreat, the baby's occasional laughter, all seemed part of a complex narrative that humanity was just beginning to comprehend. "What happens now?" Jack asked Patricia. She smiled, a smile that held both scientific excitement and human compassion. "Now we protect the research. We ensure it's used to help, not to control. And we continue learning from these extraordinary beings." The baby yawned, nestling closer to Maria. Another laugh escaped him, a sound that seemed to resonate with the forest, with the bear's distant movements, with a promise of future discoveries. As night began to fall, the clearing transformed into a scene of scientific marvel and potential. The federal agents continued their meticulous documentation, while Patricia's research documents revealed layers of complexity that challenged everything known about interspecies communication. "The neural pathways created by the compound," Patricia explained to the gathered experts, "aren't just about chemical detection. They're creating a form of collective intelligence that transcends individual species boundaries." Emma, her engineering background providing a unique perspective, examined the documents. "It's like the bears are creating a living, breathing environmental monitoring system," she observed. "But it's far more sophisticated than any technology we've developed." Isabella, still connected through the phone, was coordinating with international scientific institutions. "This discovery could revolutionize our understanding of ecological networks," she told the group. "We're looking at a completely new paradigm of environmental intelligence." The baby, seemingly unaware of the scientific breakthrough surrounding him, continued to emit occasional sounds that caused subtle reactions among the bears still lingering at the forest's edge. Jack, the forest ranger, approached Patricia. "How long have you been tracking these interactions?" he asked. His professional curiosity piqued. "Secretly, for over a decade," Patricia responded. "My father wanted to weaponize the research. I wanted to understand the deeper connections." Robert Anderson remained silent, the weight of his corporate ambitions now fully exposed. The powerful executive who had tried to control and manipulate the research now sat as a mere witness to a discovery far beyond his comprehension. Maria, the nurse, noticed something extraordinary about the baby's neurological responses. "His brain activity is unlike anything I've seen," she whispered to Patricia. "It's like he's processing information on multiple levels simultaneously." The federal agents began preparing more comprehensive documentation. What had started as an investigation into a potentially dangerous train transport had transformed into a discovery that could reshape humanity's understanding of biological communication. "The compound," Patricia continued explaining, "creates a form of empathetic resonance, not just chemical detection, but actual emotional and environmental understanding. The bears can sense chemical changes, emotional states, potential threats, all at once." Laura approached her father, a mixture of anger and scientific fascination in her eyes. "You tried to turn this into a weapon," she said. But Patricia discovered something far more important, a way of understanding our environment that goes beyond human perception. As darkness settled, the clearing became a tableau of scientific potential. The stopped train, The bear's strategic positioning, the baby's occasional sounds, all seemed part of a complex narrative that humanity was just beginning to comprehend. Marcus, though no longer visible, seemed to maintain a connection with the group. Occasional rustling in the nearby forest suggested the bears were still nearby, still observing, still part of this extraordinary moment. "What happens to the research now?" Jack asked Patricia. She smiled, a smile that held both scientific excitement and human compassion. "We protect it. We ensure it's used to help, not to control. And we continue learning from these extraordinary beings." The baby yawned again, nestling closer to Maria. Another soft laugh escaped him, a sound that seemed to vibrate with the forest itself, with the bear's distant movements, with a promise of future discoveries yet to be understood. The night continued to fall, transforming the clearing into a landscape of scientific wonder and potential. The bears, the baby, the researchers, all seemed connected by an invisible thread of extraordinary possibility. In the weeks following the extraordinary train incident, the scientific community was transformed. Patricia's research became the cornerstone of a new field of study: interspecies communication and environmental intelligence. The baby, whose name was revealed to be Daniel, became the subject of careful, ethical research. His unique neurological connections with the bears continued to fascinate scientists worldwide. Marcus and the other bears from the rehabilitation program were protected, becoming key subjects in understanding the compound's extraordinary effects. Robert Anderson faced multiple federal charges, his corporate empire crumbling under the weight of environmental violations and unethical research practices. Laura worked closely with Patricia to ensure the research would be used for environmental protection and scientific understanding. Emma Thompson, recognized for her crucial role in stopping the train and preserving the evidence, became a key advisor to the research team. Her engineering background proved invaluable in understanding the complex interactions between the compound, the bears, and the environment. Years passed. Daniel grew up with a unique connection to nature, often accompanied by Marcus and the other bears during carefully monitored research sessions. The compound Patricia had developed became a breakthrough in environmental monitoring, helping to predict natural disasters, track ecological changes, and understand complex interspecies communication. The scientific community gradually recognized that what had once seemed like a potential weapon was actually a key to understanding the intricate connections between living beings and their environment. On the 10th anniversary of the train incident, a special conference was held. Daniel, now a young teenager, demonstrated his extraordinary abilities alongside Marcus, a living testament to the power of understanding rather than controlling nature. Patricia looked out over the assembled scientists, her sister Laura by her side, knowing that they had transformed a potential disaster into a beacon of hope for environmental science.